Oops. Hold on. Okay, there we go.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Senior Legacy Symposium. I'm Susan Fennell, the room host for this room. Thank you for coming. And Andrew Schleicher from the History Department is going to be presenting on Unofficial Ambassadors of Goodwill, the Middle East Pocket Guides in American Foreign Policy during World War II. Andrew has 12 minutes to present, and then I will give the time for our Q&A period of 5 minutes.
And I think we've got one more, no, that's one more student. Guess not.
Hello. Yeah, this is the paper I'm presenting is my seminar paper. It was with Dr. Yarbrough's class. The Middle East is undoubtedly the most important region for U.S. foreign policy today. We've been involved there for so long that you have to wonder, how did all of this start? While the roots of current situations in the Middle East go back many centuries, direct involvement by the United States government is fairly new. The government's involvement in the Middle East had been sparse since 1776, but it suddenly increased after World War II. As I'm sure you know, we were relatively isolationist until the 20th century. However, there has been cultural, economic, military, and political interaction between the U.S. and the Middle East since America's founding. Importantly, this interaction and the U.S.'s lack of imperial interests gave us a good reputation in the region. American citizens' independent actions are largely responsible for this, though, not official policy. World War II, then, represents a turning point. Historians differ on how to explain the change. Most ignore events during World War II and claim that the Cold War was the cause. They argue that while the American military was active in the Middle East and North Africa during World War II, we only wanted to win the war and leave. Beyond that, they say, we left most initiatives to the British and the French because they had long-standing colonial interests there. Until the Soviet Union started causing trouble after the war, we had no reason to be more active. A few historians, though, have revisited our wartime policies. They argue that the United States was more assertive and ambitious, even going so far as to challenge French and British interests. I advanced the latter argument by analyzing unstudied primary sources called pocket guides, instructional booklets made by the military. They were part of a Hearts and Minds program that taught soldiers how to engage with Muslim civilians on a personal and cultural level. As the guides state, this program's purpose was to advance America's regional prestige. This indicates that the U.S. began seeking long-term influence in the region during World War II, not the Cold War. So why did we make the pocket guides? Well, fighting World War II required an unprecedented level of organizational activity and foreign involvement for the United States. For one, our war aims were broad and would affect the entire planet. In August of 1941, just before Pearl Harbor, Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill signed a document called the Atlantic Charter to declare American and British aims publicly. It rejects imperialism and oppression and calls for global free trade, world peace, and self-determination for all peoples. In line with this, U.S. leaders pushed for the United Nations and decolonization, putting pressure on its British and French allies. Moreover, for the first time, Americans had to fight large-scale battles in challenging environments like jungles and deserts. The military, working with anthropologists and regional experts, created pocket guides about individual countries and regions in which soldiers would be stationed. They teach soldiers how to cope with the climate, health conditions, and cultural differences. One of the first places in which we fought was North Africa, in what was called Operation Torch. Naturally then, the military made a pocket guide for North Africa, but they also made guides for Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Right now, I don't really have the time to say what we were doing in each country. Overall, though, I can say that the region was vitally important. It was the launching point for the Sicily invasion and bombing missions, the fastest way to get Lend-Lease supplies to the Soviet Union, and the location of key resources like the Suez Canal and oil. We didn't fight in all of these places, but Americans sent to them would often come into contact with Muslim civilians. That's very important to understand because the guides are very particular about how they want soldiers to interact with civilians. As the Iraq guide says, you aren't going to Iraq to change the Iraqis. We're fighting this war to preserve the principle of live and let live. Each guide is unique, but they all convey similar ideas. All of them, for instance, tell soldiers to respect Muslim culture and avoid actions that would insult them and cause a diplomatic incident. These include spitting on or entering mosques, imitating Europeans, arguing with a Muslim about religion or politics, and making passes at Muslim women. Each guide emphasizes that last one more than once. Maintaining Muslim support isn't all the guides want, though. They also want soldiers to go out of their way to engage them on a personal and cultural level. For one, every guide teaches soldiers Middle Eastern dining customs and etiquette in case they're ever invited to a Muslim's home for dinner. It seems really strange to expect this, but they include it anyway. Every guide also teaches soldiers Arabic, or Persian in the Iran guide. Each ends with a pronunciation guide and several lists of words and phrases. They include useful phrases like how to ask for directions, but they go further and teach soldiers how to have polite conversations. Most importantly, they emphasize polite expressions like good day and thank you. They also give soldiers the tools to make their own sentences, like adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, etc. They also have words for learning about people, including how to ask them their name, profession, and more. As they all explain, talking to Muslims in their own language matters because they will like you for it, even if you butcher the pronunciation. Following the guides exactly goes way beyond a soldier's normal duties. In fact, the Iran guide says, you as an American have a responsibility that goes beyond the ordinary military duties required of you. Basically, they train all soldiers to be diplomats, hence the phrase, unofficial ambassadors of goodwill. This leads me to believe that the United States was looking for more than just winning the war and avoiding trouble. The guides consistently state that the point behind such interactions is to advance the United States' status in the region. They want soldiers' actions to cause Muslims to like Americans in general and what America stands for, especially democracy. As the Iran guide states, Muslims will watch to see how you act and what you do and probably say to themselves, so this is what Americans are like. The Syria guide adds, by showing your understanding of Muslim culture, of Muslim character and custom in your relations with the Syrian people, you can maintain the good reputation that Americans already enjoy, and convince the people that the United Nations are their friends. Thus, they aren't just talking about individual friendships, they want a national one. However, you could argue that the guide's main concern is the immediate threat of Nazi Germany. They do cast the Nazis as the main enemy in their introductions. In this region, the United States only fought the Nazis in North Africa and Egypt, but German espionage and propaganda efforts continued after Operation Torch ended. If they succeeded in turning the Middle East against the Allies, it would devastate the war effort. The threat may not have been that severe, though. Most Muslims' attitudes toward the Nazis were mixed. They weren't eager to exchange British or French imperialism for German imperialism. By contrast, both the guides and American officials were confident in the strength of America's regional reputation. In his memoir, Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, wrote this about the Middle East. This widespread goodwill toward us had developed into a deep-seated belief among Near Eastern peoples, giving the U.S. a unique position in the area, where our influence and prestige were still high. The Syria, Egypt, Iran, and Iraq guides say that America has a good reputation, so most Muslims should still be friendly toward soldiers, despite Nazi propaganda. But why were the guides so concerned about America's prestige when it was already good? As I've said, American citizens had already been interacting with Muslims for over a century. This only makes sense if they were looking to gain or bolster something for the future. It's like insurance. You get it not because an emergency has happened, but because one might happen. While I couldn't find out what specific gain the Pocket Guide's writers had in mind, they were thinking in the long term. Most importantly, there's a connection between the guides and the Atlantic Charter, a vision for the world's future. Only 3 guides invoke it either directly or indirectly, but the spirit of the Atlantic Charter is central to all of them. We particularly wanted Middle Eastern nations to know we took the Charter and our anti-imperialist and decolonization policies very seriously, and the Pocket Guide's outreach program is a way of conveying that. The guides elevate the Charter as the embodiment of what the United States is fighting for. The way they have soldiers treat Muslims is inherently anti-imperialist. By respecting their culture and learning their language, soldiers will be treating Muslims as equals. No imperialist power had done that. This honors their right to live as they wish, a right which the Atlantic Charter affirms by calling for self-determination. The Syria Guide says soldiers' actions should convince the people that the United Nations are their friends. The Iraq Guide says by what you do and how you act, you can do a lot to win this war and the peace after it. Both suggest this program is connected to the Atlantic Charter's post-war vision. Moreover, the Pocket Guides mirror the State Department's desire to increase the nation's influence and status in the Middle East. Our domestic oil reserves were running low, so the State Department pushed for greater access to Middle Eastern oil during the war, often competing with the British. According to a dissertation I found, though, They also worked to supplant the British and French and achieve great power status in the region. Still, being allied with them meant they had to be cautious. It mattered little, though. The United States already had an excellent reputation, so Muslim leaders would be quick to welcome U.S. involvement. All the department needed to do was maintain that reputation. As we've seen, the pocket guides followed that same train of thought, but they were made by the military. Perhaps the State Department wasn't alone in wanting this. So in conclusion, the United States began seeking long-term influence in the Middle East during World War II, not the Cold War, as some scholars believe. Not only do the pocket guides on Middle Eastern countries prove this, but they also reflect the government's concerns and plans for the Middle East. The guides teach soldiers about Middle Eastern culture so that they may respect, understand, and engage it. While they make it clear that Korean Muslims' favor benefits the war effort, it is also meant to strengthen America's status in the region and show how serious the government is about the Atlantic Charter. This is a goal with long-term implications. If they had been focused on the short term, the guides wouldn't have told soldiers to engage with Muslims on such a deep personal level, because that would take them away from fighting. Moreover, they wouldn't have needed to emphasize enhancing America's status, because it was already good in the present. Such things go beyond the immediate needs of the war and look toward the future. Hey, questions, comments, smart remarks? Yes?
Did you get to see some of the original pocket guides?
Yes, in fact, I was able to get online copies of them online. If you go back a few slides, you'll show that I showed the covers of them.
Right.
Or do you mean physical copies?
Physical copies.
The physical copies, no. Actually, Dr. Yarbrough did show a physical copy of at least one of them in class, but beyond that, no, I just use mostly digital copies.
I just wondered if anybody had, kept them around there in museums or.
Where did you find them originally?
You can buy them on Amazon for like
Oh, is that
$12.
right?
Oh,
Is that
wow.
right?
So I bought the North Africa and a couple of the other ones too, just for fun.
Yes?
How different were these physical, from these pocket guides, from pocket guides that might be issued to Army soldiers going over now?
That's a very interesting question. I actually did talk about that in the original paper. The closest equivalent I found was the Iraq Smart Card, which was given to soldiers in 2006. And it was a lot shorter, a lot less detailed, and the phrases that they gave were very specific. They weren't they didn't give as many. They were mostly phrases that were only just for a useful purpose, like stop right there or hand on the ground, and very tellingly, do you speak English? This guide actually tells them to learn how to speak their language. And it's much more friendly rather than hostile and aggressive. I think a big way to kind of explain that is the fact that in 2006, we were going to Iraq to fight. In the 1940s, we weren't. Iraq was mostly important as a part of the supply line to Russia. Yes?
So I'm curious, I don't know if you did any research about it at all, but you've done a good job showing that the pocket guides reveal an interest in the United States in trying to, as you say, buy insurance in the region. About how willing or how much did the soldiers actually implement the stuff they were taught in the pocket guides?
Very good question. I did try to look at that in the paper. I didn't really spend a whole lot of time on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know that I found very few references to the pocket guides. I found only one that said he actually got a copy of it, but that's it. And apparently there's one book that I got that showed that there were some atrocities committed by American soldiers towards Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the details about those, but yeah, apparently those guys didn't get the pocket guides, so didn't pay any attention to them.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
It struck me just now as you were speaking that there's a little bit of a tension between the values of the Atlantic Charter, which really emphasizes national self-determination, and the way that the pocket guides refer to the hearts and minds that Americans are trying to win as Muslims or Arabs, that is, by religious or ethnic identity terms rather than national ones. They're not talking about Egyptians so much, or Iraqis, or Syrian. There is a little bit of that. Did you detect that same tension, and what do you make of it during that period?
Well, I didn't really see it as tension, but yeah, I will say that the guides are quite stereotyped. I mean, they really reinforce in stereotypes of Muslims as all about religion and as very violent people. And one of the points of winning them over that the guides mention is that we need them, we need the fighters. That they're good fighting men, so we really don't want to turn them against us. And it also does address some kind of the cultural stereotypes addressed in movies that many soldiers would have seen at the time. As for why they called them Muslims specifically, yeah, I think that's just a lack of really of nuance. But I do know that the State Department in particular was focused on currying favor with Muslims in particular because they were the majority, even if that meant alienating minorities like Jews and Kurds. The Muslims were the majority. They're the group that mattered the most in their minds. Any other questions?
Did they just refer to them as Muslim, or did they call them Sunni, and did they differentiate like they do today, or did they just use the broad term Muslim?
But in most part, they just use Muslim, although they spell it not, but they don't spell it the way we do. It's Moslem. But I think in one, I'm not sure which one, but one they do actually talk about the distinction between Sunni and Shiite or Shia. But yeah, it's very, very brief discussion. They do talk about some of the beliefs of Islam. But yeah, it's just a very brief, basic stuff. So they're not quite that nuanced, no.
And we are out of time. Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, hey, Dr. Gossi.
Hello. You want to see remember his name?
50 pages.
Is it on that channel?
Yeah, I have an email.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks so much. Good presentation.
Thank you. Can I just get passed around electronic?
Oh, yeah.